Hello everyone. So a while back I did a video on encoding versus encryption. I talked about how encryption relies on an algorithm plus a key to encrypt and decrypt data. Well, today we're going to dive in and talk about the two different categories of encryption, asymmetric and symmetric encryption. So first we'll talk about symmetric encryption. This concept is fairly straightforward. If something is symmetric, that means that it is equal or the same on both sides of the center. With cryptography, that means that the same key is used on both sides, both the encryption and the decryption. On a standard doorknob, you'll have one key that both locks and unlocks the door. On a safe, you'll have one combination that can lock and unlock it. The same concept applies here. We'll use the classic example of Alice and Bob, or A and B. If Alice and Bob know that they want to communicate with each other securely, they will create an encryption and decryption key that they will both know but no one else will know. Alice writes an email for Bob, encrypts it with the key, it gets sent across the network to Bob, who then decrypts it with that same key. If the email were to get intercepted along the way, the snooper would only get jumbled and unreadable information with no real way to decipher it. Now, this method is great, but there are a couple big issues with it. The first is sharing the key, and the second issue is scalability. So when Alice and Bob want to create a key for them to use, they obviously both have to know it. This is fine if they meet in person and can discuss the key that they're going to use. But what if they're on opposite sides of the country, or the globe, and they can't meet in person? Well, one would have to send the key to the other via, let's say, email, and that leaves it vulnerable for someone to intercept the key and use it against them. Now, the second issue, scalability, comes about when multiple people need encryption keys to talk to each other in some sort of larger organization. Let's say that Charlie wants to be able to talk to Alice and Bob. Well, then a key needs to be created for Alice and Charlie, for Bob and Charlie, and then the original key that we have for Alice and Bob. We just went from needing one key for two people to needing three keys for three people. If we had a fourth person, then we would have 6 keys. 5 people would require 10 keys, and so forth and so on. If an organization has 50 employees that each need a key to securely talk to one another, they would need a total of 1,225 keys. However, there is a fix for both of these issues in the form of asymmetric encryption. So, asymmetric encryption is where one key encrypts the data and another key decrypts it. Now, these keys are produced together and are mathematically linked so they'll work with one another. However, there is no way that you can ascertain one key from just looking at the other. Now, how does this really work when communicating with other people? And how does it solve the two problems with symmetric encryption? Well, here's how it works. Each individual that wants to securely communicate with somebody else will have 2 mathematically linked keys that get created. One of them is called a public key, and the other is called a private key. Now, as the names would imply, the first can be shared around freely without fear of people cracking your data, and the second is kept hidden away and only you should know this key. So, looking at our example, we have Alice and Bob that want to talk to each other securely. Each of them will create a public key and a private key. Alice can see Bob's public key, and Bob can see Alice's public key. The private keys cannot be seen by the other party. So when Alice writes an email to Bob, she will take Bob's public key and encrypt that email. Now at this point, Alice can't even decrypt the email she just created. The only key that can decrypt that email is Bob's private key. So the email is sent over securely, and when Bob receives it, he can decrypt it with his own private key. When he responds, he will encrypt his response with Alice's public key and send it over. Then Alice will decrypt it with her private key. Even if the email gets intercepted along the way, there is no way for the snooper to decrypt it without the recipient's private key, which has never been sent over the network for him or her to intercept. Okay, let me give you one more simplified example in case you're still a bit confused on this. So let's use the example of writing physical letters. So Alice writes a letter to Bob, and she doesn't want the mailman to open her letter and read it along the way. So she gets a special type of safe to place the letter in while it's being sent. Now this special safe can be locked with one 4-digit combination and can be unlocked with a different 4-digit combination. So Alice has a public key, which is, let's say, 1234, and a private key of 1212. Bob has a public key of, we'll say 4444, and a private key of 3214. When Alice writes the letter, she takes Bob's public key, 4444, and uses it to lock that safe. At this point, she cannot unlock the safe, and neither can the mailman. Only Bob can unlock the safe with his private key of 3214. Bob then repeats this process with his reply using Alice's public key to lock the safe before being sent. And once Alice receives it, she can unlock it using her own private key. So the problem of key sharing is solved because the decryption key has never actually been sent over the network, and thus can't be compromised in that way. As for the number of keys needed, it is significantly less. Everyone only needs one public key and one private key. Now, when it comes to cryptography, there is so much more that we can dig into and learn, and I hope to do more videos on the subject in the future. But for now, I hope you guys learned something new. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.